A faint whisper broke through the static of a battered radio, a question carried by fear more than sound. "Who's hunting us?" Then silence. Seconds later, two figures vanished into the dust of the Tangi Valley. Their signal lost forever. The hills swallowed everything. Just as they had done for 18 long months, 90 American soldiers had fallen there. One by one. Each death coming without warning. Each patrol returning lighter than when it left. The valley had earned a name among the troops. The killing ground, at Forward Operating Base Salerno. The air hung thick with heat and diesel. It was late afternoon, around 4:30 p.m., when Staff Sergeant Emily Rains stepped off the transport truck and into a place where ghosts seemed to outnumber the living 20 teens. She moved with quiet confidence, hair, uniform sun-bleached. Her rifle case slung over one shoulder. The chatter of generators mixed with the sharp rhythm of distant helicopter blades. Inside the main operations building, the light was dim, filtered through dust-streaked windows. There, on the far wall, she saw them, 90 faces, each framed in the dull gray of printer paper, pinned side by side until the wall looked like a mosaic of sacrifice. Emily stood still for a long moment. The noise around her faded until only the sound of her breathing remained. She traced the line of photographs with her eyes, pausing on names she didn't know, but somehow already carried Hallen. Every soldier on that wall had walked through the same dirt, stared at the same ridgelines, and never come back. She wasn't afraid, but the weight of the place pressed against her like the air before a storm. Somewhere deep in her memory, her grandfather's voice rose again, calm and certain. The hunter who moves first loses. It wasn't advice anymore. It was a warning. She tightened the strap of her rifle case, turned from the wall, and stepped back into the fading Afghan sun. The wind carried the scent of dust and metal. The hunt had already begun. The wind always came early on the Wyoming plains, steady and cold. Carrying the smell of sage and gun oil, Emily Rains was 12, the first time her grandfather placed a rifle in her hands. Gunnery Sergeant Walter Rains had spent 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine sniper, earning a Silver Star. He never talked about. He taught her not with words but with rhythm, with patience. The mornings began at 5:30 a.m., the sun still behind the hills, the frost silvering the grass. He would stand behind her in silence, adjusting her stance, steadying her breathing until rifle, heartbeat, and horizon became one line. Their bond was built in that quiet. She learned to read wind the way he read people. When the grass bent, she could tell its speed within a mile per hour. When dust lifted off the dirt road, she adjusted her hold, knowing how a 308 round drifted over distance. He showed her how to track the shimmer of heat that distorted a scope's view at noon, and how to aim between heartbeats when the pulse made the sight waver. It wasn't just shooting, it was listening, observing, predicting. By 16, Emily could hit a moving target at 600 yards and tell direction by the lean of a tree. He told her that skill was only half of it. The rest was discipline. Walter carried his own ghost quietly. At night, sitting on the porch, he would clean his old Remington 700 and stare at nothing for long stretches. Emily knew not to ask. He had learned the cost of moving too soon, of rushing a shot. His lessons were never about killing, they were about control, understanding the person on the other side, and recognizing fear before it dictated action. Patience, he said, was the most dangerous weapon a shooter could carry. When he died, Emily found his leather-bound journal in the top drawer of his desk. Its pages were filled with sketches of villages, wind notes, and small bits of philosophy written in block letters. On the last page, only one line: "The hunter who moves first loses." She kept that journal close, its edges worn smooth from her hands. On the night before she deployed to Afghanistan, she opened it again under the dim light of her barracks bunk. The words hadn't changed, but their weight had. She understood now that it was never just about war. It was about who you chose to be when the world went silent. The air inside the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Salerno felt heavy, pressed down by the heat and the constant hum of the air conditioner. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly against the concrete walls. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Harding stood at the front. His sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on the map projected behind him. The Tangi Valley stretched across the screen, a jagged line of ridges and roads that had claimed more American lives than any other place in the province. Behind him, the wall of faces remained 90 photographs, arranged in perfect military order, a reminder of what precision fire could do when no one saw it coming. Harding's tone carried no anger, only exhaustion. 11 men from his battalion had died in 4 months. Every patrol that moved through the valley risked becoming another recovery mission. He pointed to grid squares where the ambushes had taken place, his laser marking red dots across the terrain. Counter-sniper teams, air cover, recon flights. None of it had worked. The shooters struck between 400 and 700 meters, changed position, and disappeared before anyone could respond. The room was silent, except for the whir of the projector and the occasional scrape of boots against the floor. Captain Dresser broke the quiet first. His voice was sharp, his frustration raw. He demanded more aggressive patrols, more visibility, more movement. The logic was simple but reckless. Movement meant exposure, and exposure was what the enemy fed on. Emily Rains sat near the back, her notebook open, her eyes fixed on the projected map. She didn't speak until Harding asked if anyone had a different approach. Calmly, she requested access to every after-action report, every grid coordinate, and every timeline from the past 18 months. The room shifted. Dresser muttered about wasted time and theory. Harding hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He knew desperation when he saw it. And Emily wasn't guessing. She was calculating. She rose, saluted, and left the room with the same quiet confidence that had unsettled men louder than her. Outside, the air felt sharper, the noise of the base distant. She looked toward the mountains on the horizon. The Tangi Valley waited. It was a place ruled by patience, and she was about to test whether she had enough of it to survive. The night was still, except for the wind brushing the canvas of the tent and the faint hum of generators outside the wire. Inside, under the dim red glow of her headlamp, Staff Sergeant Emily Rains sat cross-legged on the floor. 68 after-action reports covered the space around her, their corners curling from heat and handling. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and the old paper inked with the stories of men who never came back. She marked each sheet with grid coordinates, colored pins pressed into a worn topographical map spread across her cot. Her grandfather's leather journal rested open beside her, its pages filled with faded notes about terrain, patience, and enemy habits. She read through one report after another. Attack at 0800 hours, 2 rounds, North Ridge. Another, at 1730, same ridge line, opposite side. She underlined words that repeated: morning, evening, sun low, wind calm. The more she read, the less random it felt. She drew lines connecting the coordinates, and shapes began to form. The same 3 ridges appeared again and again, always overlooking the main supply route, always during hours when the sun blinded anyone looking uphill. It wasn't luck. It was design. Emily leaned back, her pen tapping against the map. The shooters weren't ghosts at all. They were professionals, disciplined and deliberate, rotating between high grounds every 8 to 10 days. The pattern matched what her grandfather had written decades ago. Familiarity is safety. Safety breeds routine. Routine makes you predictable. She could almost hear his voice in the silence. She whispered to herself, almost smiling. They think they're invisible, but patterns always leave footprints. By morning, her tent was a mess of notes, maps, and circles. She stood before Lieutenant Colonel Harding in the briefing room, her uniform still dusty from the night before. Her tone was steady as she explained the rotation, the terrain logic, and the timing. Harding crossed his arms, skeptical, but listening. When she said her confidence level was 70%, he raised an eyebrow. Captain Dresser scoffed, calling it theory. Emily met his look and replied softly, 70% is better than 0. Harding nodded once, authorizing the mission with 12-hour radio check-ins. Back at her tent, she packed quietly. The rifle, the scope, the journal, as the first light of dawn spread across the base. She stepped outside into the cool air. Soldiers moved about in the distance, starting another day. For Emily, the hunt was beginning. She had seen through the chaos, and now she was walking straight into its pattern. The sun had not yet risen when Emily left Forward Operating Base Salerno. The air was thin and cold, the kind of cold that burned quietly through her gloves. Around here, the world was still asleep. The faint light on the horizon brushed the ridgelines in soft gray, and each step she took away from the base felt heavier than the one before. Her pack rested high on her shoulders, balanced and methodical, carrying everything she would need for the next 4 days. Inside it were her rations, camouflage, netting, a spotting scope, her AN divided by PRC 152 radio, and her grandfather's leather journal, her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, chambered in 300 Winchester Magnum and fitted with a loopholed Mark IV scope, hung steady across her chest. She moved slowly across uneven terrain, avoiding the well-worn trails that locals and patrols alike used. Her pace was deliberate, her eyes always scanning for movement. When the wind shifted, she crouched, watching dust lift from the rocks and drift east. She noted the direction quietly to herself, adjusting her mental map. Every few hundred meters, she checked her compass, keeping to the shadows of the terrain. The valley ahead stretched for miles, a wide cut of earth marked by dry riverbeds and scattered stone. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of insects and the crunch of her boots on gravel. By late morning, she reached the southern ridge, overlooking the zone she had studied for nights. From this position, she could observe the entire length of the supply road below. She dug a shallow hide, using her entrenching tool, reinforcing it with rocks and brush. She cut nearby. The spot offered natural concealment, the sun's arc keeping her in shadow through the afternoon. She laid her rifle across a sandbag, adjusted the bipod legs, and checked her field of view through the scope. Range, 1,500 meters to the north ridge. Wind light at 5 miles per hour. She jotted each detail in her notebook. Small and neat. The hours stretched into days. On the second day, a patrol moved along the road below, their gear clattering faintly in the distance. Moments later, sharp cracks split the air, enemy fire from somewhere up the valley. She tracked the sound through her scope, but found no visual target. Radio chatter filled her earpiece for several minutes before falling silent again. 2 wounded. Medevac inbound. She stayed still, every muscle tight, watching the ridgeline long after the echoes faded. The third day passed in silence. The valley felt frozen in time. The only movement, the slow crawl of clouds. She rationed her water, cleaned her rifle, and wrote short notes in her journal time. Light. Wind. Still nothing. By the fourth day, near 2:45 p.m., a faint flicker caught her eye along the northern ridge. 2 figures, small but deliberate, moved into position behind a cluster of rocks. One carried a rifle with a long barrel, the other adjusted a spotting scope and radio action. They worked in rhythm, professional and calm. Emily's breath slowed as she watched them settle into their hide. Every calculation she had made, every sleepless hour of study, had led to this. She adjusted her focus, her heartbeat quiet and steady. Her analysis had been right. Through her scope, Emily watched the two figures settle into the rocky outcrop, 610 meters northeast of her hide. Their movements were precise and deliberate. One carried an SVD Dragunov rifle. The other adjusted a Type 85 spotting scope and spoke softly into a radio. The pair worked like clockwork. A practice team that had done this many times before. Emily steadied her breath and pressed her cheek lightly against the stock of her M2010 enhanced sniper rifle. She confirmed the distance through her loophole mark, 4-scope 610 meters exactly. The wind moved northwest at 8 to 10 miles per hour. Elevation difference, 40 meters. Temperature in the high 80s. Every detail mattered. Every breath was data. She adjusted her scope carefully, dialing windage to compensate for the drift. Elevating 2 clicks for the incline, her finger brushed the trigger guard, then rested gently on the trigger's curve. The rifle felt alive. The steel warm from hours under the sun. Through the glass, she could see the shimmer of heat between them, a mirage that distorted the air just enough to test her focus. Her pulse slowed. Matching her breathing cycle, the reticle drifted across the spotter's chest. The man shifted slightly, leaning closer to the shooter as they aligned their field of fire. Her grandfather's words came back to her, clear as if he were whispering through the wind. The first shot must end the fight before it begins. Timing was everything. The shooter leaned in, and for a moment, the two stood nearly shoulder to shoulder, only 2 feet apart. Emily exhaled halfway, held the last breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked gently into her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the spotter collapse backward, his body folding in silence. She cycled the bolt in one motion, reacquired, and placed her reticle on the shooter, who was now scrambling for cover. The second shot broke the still air. He dropped before reaching his rifle. 2 shots, 2 bodies, then nothing. For several minutes, Emily didn't move. The world around her returned in pieces, the hiss of wind, the buzz of insects, the soft pop of cooling metal in her barrel. She remained in overwatch for 30 minutes, scanning for any movement. When the valley stayed quiet, she reached for her AN divided by PRC 152 radio and transmitted calmly, 2 enemy combatants down. Grid coordinates follow. Standing by for confirmation. Her voice was steady, detached, every word by the book. The clearing team arrived hours later. Through her spotting scope, Emily watched them recover the SVD rifle, the Type 85 scope, a small radio, and a notebook marked with hand-drawn maps. Later, intelligence confirmed what she already suspected. These two were part of a 3-man sniper cell, responsible for nearly half of the American deaths in the valley. 2 weeks after her report, a drone strike, guided by the recovered notebook, eliminated the last member of the team. That night, Emily stayed in her hide until the sky turned dark. The wind cooled. Carrying the scent of dust and silence, she looked out across the valley where the sun had fallen and thought of the wall at Salerno. 90 faces, 90 names. The hunt was over. But the weight of what it meant pressed deep into her chest. There was no victory in this. Only quiet. 6 months passed without a single sniper attack in the Tangi Valley. The same roads that once claimed the lives of dozens of soldiers now stretched quiet under the Afghan sun. Convoys rolled through the valley in steady rhythm, engines humming instead of echoing with gunfire. The hills that had once hidden the enemy now held only dust, wind, and the low hum of distant patrols. The wall at Forward Operating Base Salerno stayed up, its 90 photographs untouched. No new names were added. The silence that followed was the kind only soldiers understood. It was not peace. Exactly. But it was something close. Emily returned to base a few days after the operation. Her body worn, her face pale from days in the heat. She worked quietly, supporting other units across nearby provinces. reviewing patrol routes, and identifying possible sniper positions before they turned deadly. Her reports were concise, methodical, and unshakably calm. She asked for nothing, rarely spoke unless necessary, and carried the same precision into everything she touched. Lieutenant Colonel Harding read her after-action report twice before signing his recommendation. He noted her patience, her intelligence, and her restraint. The request for a Bronze Star Medal with the V device for valor went through faster than anyone expected. The ceremony was held on a clear morning around 9:30 a.m. behind the main operations building. The formation was small, no fanfare, only the low rustle of uniforms and the sound of the desert wind. Harding's words were brief, focused more on the men who had been lost than on medals. When it was over, Captain Dresser stepped forward. He looked at her for a moment before offering his hand, his voice low. He told her he had been wrong. Emily nodded once, her answer quiet and steady. It was never about being right. It was about ending it. That night, she sat outside her quarters. The hum of the generators mixing with the faint call of distant night birds. The stars were sharp and clear, the same ones she had watched through her scope in the valley. She leaned back, eyes open to the sky, and felt the weight of the silence she had created. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even pride. It was the kind of quiet that comes only after too much noise, the kind that feels like both an ending and a beginning. When Emily returned home, the war already felt far away. The flight from Afghanistan to Georgia was quiet, the kind of silence that stayed with her long after the engines shut down. She was reassigned to the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning, a place built on precision and patience. The training ranges stretched wide under the southern sky, the sound of rifles echoing across open fields like a rhythm she already knew by heart. The air smelled of oil and dust, the same scent that had marked every chapter of her life. Teaching came naturally to her. The young soldiers who stood on the firing line reminded her of herself years ago, eager, determined, and a little unsure of what real patience meant. She walked behind them, correcting their posture, helping them steady their breathing, and teaching them how to read the wind by watching heat waves ripple over the range. She adjusted scopes with practiced hands, explaining how to hold the trigger at the break point rather than pull it. To them, she was calm and unshakable, the same way her grandfather had once been to her. She kept his leather journal in her kit, its cover worn smooth from time and travel. One afternoon, after training ended around 4:15 p.m., she sat alone on the edge of the range and opened it again. The pages were faded, the handwriting faint, but the last line was still clear. The hunter who moves first loses. She read it slowly, her thumb resting on the edge of the paper. It no longer felt like a rule for battle. It was something larger now, something about discipline, timing, and the wisdom to wait until the moment truly mattered. She started passing those words to her students, the same way her grandfather had once passed them to her. Some smiled, not yet understanding. Others nodded, storing the lessons somewhere deep for later. As the class ended, she watched them pack their rifles, their voices fading into the wind. Beyond the range, the grass swayed in soft waves, the same way it had on the plains of Wyoming long ago. She stood still, listening. Wars would always change. Weapons would evolve. But patience, respect, and legacy would not. Those were the things that lasted, and she would keep them alive, one lesson at a time.